Hello and good afternoon. It is June 2nd, and this is my second devlog um, for Project Blue, which I don't think I said the name, but that's just tentatively what I'm calling it. So, Project Blue. Um, First chapter, whatever, first episode was more of a sort of like all-arounders trying to explain up to where I had gotten to, but not going too deep. Today, I want to talk about more of like what I've covered this past week in a little more detail. So, um, this week's focus was primarily on touching up how some of the animation like prioritization or like state prioritization works, as well as kind of fixing up hitboxes to be more workable in the future. So just to like start the demo, first thing that might be noticeable compared to the demo from before is there's now hitboxes already being drawn to them. These are more specifically like the hurt boxes. These would be represent like the hittable, the targetable portions of the player character. So, um, oh, I guess I'll spoil the interaction now. There is no like actual context being made yet. Still, the hitboxes do not have like any like proper functionality. But what I did do in order to make this work is I set up a a system where we are now drawing hitboxes. We're like triggering, we're spawning multiple at a time hitboxes and having them drawn on a timer when it makes sense. So to kind of like touch where that is happening. Let's see, it's the spawn hitboxes, which should be in the event tick. Yeah, okay. So the way this is kind of set up right now, we have this hitbox array, or well, that's the Boolean array changed. So down here, it's a better way to look. Hitbox array as well as array changed. For now, there is, I mean, as I kind of like demoed, there's like walking and there's like a punch. So we'll use the punch because it sort of better exemplifies what's going on here. We do a check on state priorities. So this is what I was talking about before. You might remember in the previous demo, you could like punch and slide around at the same time. And it wasn't as if you just had momentum and were sliding. It was WASD was basically still working while you punched. So now what's going on is there's actually something of a check being made to ensure that like if you're trying to do something of a lower priority, in this case moving, it's going to be canceled out by something that's higher priority, such as jabbing. So to walk over that again, there's a lot of messages popping up in the debug or in the console. But okay, so actually walking is maybe a little bit easier to read. You can see the pink. It's saying animation priority updated 1.0. The animation priority, as I said, is that number. It should be up integer really. I don't know why I made it a float, but anyway, it is currently 1 when you walk, and then you can see there's a yellow message, current priority reset. So idle is 0. There won't be anything to like show that, but it's basically just saying like there's nothing. You're being refreshed, so now you can walk again. So I can like shimmy forward like this. If I jab, you see at the bottom of that list of prints, animation priority updated with 2.0. And so there's this giant mash of messages. That is what's happening when I hit jab and then I try to walk. New animation priority rejected 1.0, current priority 2. So that's just saying like, hey, you're in the middle of a jab and jab's not, I mean, there's no way to cancel anything right now, but in the future, jab won't be cancelable by walking. So you are that's just for debug purposes, letting me know that I'm constricted. So that's what this macro is doing. We can jump into it, but it's just a bunch of like little simple math basically. I do have actually 3 outputs, execution outputs at the macro. One is for when the priority is being like overwritten by a higher one where it's rejecting, which is what's shooting at that obnoxious message when I move. And then there's one for maintaining it. And the maintaining is there for like hold actions where like in principle you're like applying the execution over and over. I actually don't know if it like shows. Yeah, okay. So you can see when I start walking, it says updated, but then it immediately says maintained. That's why there's actually a that third in-between state where it's like the priorities are even. It's because when I do a jab, I'm only really caring about, for now anyway, I'm only caring about like overriding the current one because there's no reason to like hold a jab. But for walking, if the priority of walking, which is a 1, is greater than the current priority, so if it's greater than 0 basically if I'm idling, or if it's the same, if I'm already walking and I do a movement input, then I also want to do the move input. So that's kind of like why there's like this delineation. I don't know that priority rejected will ever actually be used for like continuing execution flow, so realistically this macro could not have it. But it at least helps me for now to like kind of think about it, like visualize it a little bit. I probably will end up removing that one because I think this should just like stuff the execution. It's lower priority, so it shouldn't occur. Then there's no reason for. There's no reason. I can't think of any reason off the top of my head for why this we want to continue like the execution flow. So yeah, that's that. I can't like mash jab because jab is only going to continue. This flow is only going to continue if it's updated, not maintained. If I do this, actually, we should be able to redo what we had before, where you can see I'm like resetting the jab animation, which is not what we want. You don't want to cancel it. You want jabs to cancel frame 1 into jabs. Maybe later on we'll do something where on a hit or on block, a jab can cancel into another jab, which is a pretty common thing in fighting games. So now I'm like mashing and you only see the one. Another thing that is different, you might have already noticed, is that how the hitboxes are being represented. In the past, it was a debug line or debug box, technically. So we can look at that real quick. So you can actually see I left the code in here, but this is basically what it was doing before. We took the transform of the actor, we just piped it into the debug, and then the color of it was being interpreted based on the hitbox's like variable, whether or not it is a hurtbox. Hurtbox again being like if this is a part of the character that gets struck, it should be green, and if it is the thing that does the striking, it should be red. And I think that's just like an intuitive way to read it. And I want to say that's common for how training tools represent it, but I don't know. I haven't played too many different fighting games. So that's disconnected. That's not how it does anymore. Now what's happening is there's actually a mesh here. I forget what's the hotkey to like center it. Is it D? Is it F? Is it T? Well, I don't know. We'll zoom in manually. There is now a very tiny cube here, and this is being kind of in a similar fashion. This is getting the values for the hitbox, like the blueprint. It's being scaled appropriately. Let's see. Is this where it's happening? No, I don't think so. Box values. I forget where I actually feed the transform in. Get actor transform, add box collision. But the box collision is not something. I actually don't even know if I'm going to use this. I had this, so this was in actually before like even the first video. This was before I had any semblance of what the hitbox was going to be. I was just like, I think a collision box makes sense. I think at this point I'll be doing something maybe more manual as far as like whether or not the mesh intersects. So I don't know if this will stick around. Oh yeah, okay, that's right. So it is actually, if I'm not mistaken, the sides of the hitbox is being configured here. That's where it is. When we... Okay, so actually I need to backpedal a little bit. I talked about how the state prioritization is being handled here on BP Manny, on the player character. The next step then is to... I kind of want to do this chronologically how I worked it, so I'm going to step over this stuff in the middle. We have this macro here where we configure the hitbox data. Actually, the main takeaway here is that hitbox data is now, I've got structs, and I'll dive into that here in a second. That gets fed into the hitbox array, which I mentioned before. And then we also are doing this Boolean check that is like saying, hey, the values got changed. Reason I do that then is if I go into the event tick, we have a check against the hitbox array change. And this is just to save on performance, because I don't want to have to like iterate through the hitbox and do a check on the event tick. I want to just look at a Boolean. I'm like, oh, something changed? Okay. You know, so we unset it, so we will then know that this has been handled, and then print string for debug purposes, and then we'll actually go into this method. So this is where I was just looking at a second ago. Now we are going to iterate through our hitbox array. We're going to build the hitbox transform, which is kind of just like using the values that are relevant to the shape of it, and then like tapering them onto the transform of the actor, right? Because we want the hitbox to like follow them in some sense. We do that, and then we spawn it again using those that transform, attach it so it's actually like it hangs there. And then we go into this initialize function. I'll admit this part feels a little bit weird to me. This might be like a smelly code situation, but my understanding of how the construction event, where does that actually live? Construction script. The way this works to me seems like it's best suited for things that are already existing in your world, and you want something to like happen with them, like while it's in like the editor. Like you can adjust, like take in pass in values and have it affect variables here or something. But when something is being spawned at game time, like these hitboxes are, like the hitboxes aren't just sitting there. They only appear when there's a player or when that player does an action, or a character, I should say. It seems to me like you need to then use the begin play, because it's like the stuff that is then being executed at the start of runtime, or the runtime of the object or the actor. So all of that to say is like it felt a little bit weird though, because you can't feed, to my knowledge, you can't feed values into here. So I have a spawn hit, not this though, not this one. Maybe I should rename these. The spawn hitboxes function, which then which calls the initialize hitbox method. There we go. Sorry. So this, even though it lives in or no, it doesn't live in BP Mani. It gets called from BP Mani. This is kind of like my construction, what I think of as a like constructor in like traditional like Java or C# coding. So it's at this point that we feed in that hitbox data that I referenced before. We start setting values on the starting variables on the actual hitbox. So I guess before like following along with this, let's actually just look real quickly at the struct. Yeah, so hitbox, we'll just pull up the move one too. Structs were a new thing for me this week, but thankfully they seem pretty straightforward. The two structs that we're working with is a hitbox and a move. A move would almost always, will definitely be made up of several hitboxes. If you can think about like how, you know, a move is like over the course of several frames, it will need like hitboxes that adjust, maybe not literally every frame, but like on a per frame basis potentially. So like if a character does, my only example right now is a jab, right? It's like very small and it's only got one active hitbox, and I actually think that you can see that red box in the middle. I think that is like pretty appropriate for a jab. But you can imagine a much larger move, slower move, where maybe like the character does like an uppercut, and the hitbox might start low when they're still like on the ground, and if they like launch themselves as part of the uppercut, they might jump up and like the hitbox will like go up with them. And in that same sense, the hurt boxes will have to adjust too. So like any given move will definitely have several hitboxes going on. And so the move struct is what encapsulates all of those hitboxes, and then the hitbox is like what's saying like how each of those squares are drawn. So we've got offsets to say where the hitbox needs to be, an X and a Z, because it's a 3D game, but nothing's happening in the Y, which is like the depth, like nothing's going forward, backward. So X and Z, and then scale for like the actual sizing of the box. The other values, you can see them right here, is Hurtbox, as I mentioned before. That's really just for like color coding purposes. Yeah, for now, that's all that matters. Obviously, like once I'm like I'm working on hitboxes intersecting, I'll want to know like is a Hurtbox intersecting with a hitbox basically. If so, then that's like when damage states start coming into play. The other thing is active frame and inactive frame. If you're not familiar with like fighting games, I don't even know if inactive frame is something that gets used a lot, like if that's a term people use, but it seems intuitive next to active frame. Active frame is like if you hit jab, it comes out on what frame. So actually, I'll pull up the table now. So let's see. So at this moment, there's one move. Like I said, it's just the jab. It knows what animation to play. So in this case, animation montage, mani, far jab. And then here are the hitbox values. So first one I would always glance at, maybe I should move this to the top of the data, but like is a Hurtbox. This one is not a Hurtbox. And these two are. So easy way to think of it is like this is the red one. This is the one that's like going to be doing damage, and these two are representing like where the player character could still be hit while they're doing their jab. Now, in this case, the Hurtboxes have 0 and 0 as their active and inactive frames, and that's just because like they aren't changing. And I mean, this is kind of simplified, right? If I play it real quickly again, you might argue that like the hand itself should probably have a Hurtbox. That's not uncommon. Like this is a pretty disjointed hitbox for a jab, honestly. Also, just acknowledge it now too, because it's like a probably noticeable if you're familiar with like frame data. There's kind of a bug right now, which is where that it's not even really a bug. I just haven't gotten to implementing it. Is the Hurtboxes don't reset back currently. So look at how the top Hurtbox right now is like kind of clipping midway into his left forearm. Once he jabs, it extends a little bit. It's not going to retract back. That's just something I still have to implement. So there. That was me trying to ensure that I could I'm actually updating and like clearing Hurtboxes. Before I was just using the same values and it was like unclear if I was just adding one hitbox or if I was redrawing the whole set, which was kind of the intention. So but anyway, yeah, so the jab active hitbox comes out frame 12 and it becomes inactive on frame 15. So it's active for 3 full frames, and I think for a jab that seems about right. I'd have to go back and look at an example. I've been using Street Fighter 6 as like my reference point, but I don't actually know off the top of my head if that's like a real number you would see on a jab, or if it's too big or too small. But yeah. So yeah, okay. So that covers like how the data is being stored. So let's go back, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Let's see. So we're in the initialized hitbox values. Let's take one step back actually. So in the hitbox array, this is on BP Man again. This is like when we're starting to attach the actor to the character, but we haven't initialized the values yet. This is all being iterated through an array. So at this point, through this stuff, we've got one set of hitbox data. Then we go into this initialized value, and you can see we're like breaking it apart, and we're fishing out some of the other data. We fished out like the first couple pieces over here for like the positioning, and now we're fishing out some of the later pieces to actually be stored on the hitbox. So these are Hurtbox and the active and inactive frames. So this was a part that I got hung up on quite a bit as far as like how to do this the correct way. In my previous video, when you hit the jab, the hitbox was just being drawn like frame 1. There was no delay. It was just like the hitbox existed with coordinates, but the idea of like active or inactive frame hadn't been implemented. What's happening now is, well, we're doing some. Oh, yeah, we're doing a conditional check. Like I said, if we said if we had if blah, 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 blah. For the hurt boxes, which had active and inactive frames of 0, we actually just want them to be like instantaneous. And so what I found is, well, not what I found was, I guess what I skip a little bit of logic here. I do. Actually, let me backpedal. Let me think about this more. Set timer. That's right. Okay. So what I had, so the part that hung me up was like, how do I handle the fact that I'm drawing, like, I'm trying to like do a cluster of hitboxes, and I'm then spawning them based on their individual times. My early work was trying to use the set timer by function name call inside BP Mini, because I was already doing the spawn info here, and I was like, I will just spawn the hitbox with a delay. The hard part, or like not the hard part, the part that made it seemingly impossible, maybe there's a better way to do this, or there's a proper node or something, an implementation where this would have made sense on Manny, was that by calling this timer function several times in like quick succession, I was effectively resetting timer. It seems to me like there is like a uniqueness to these timers where it's like one timer per one function name, so they're calling the spawn hitbox call here. All right, not per character. I should say per actor, per function call can exist. And so when you're like trying to spam it, like I'm trying to spam the hitbox and the 2 hurt boxes, all I've done is I've like reset them and I've overwritten the call. So in that sense, it was not tenable to like actually have a sequence of hitboxes and hurt boxes being drawn over the course of a set amount of time. So that's why it lives in the hitbox now, which it just kind of makes sense, you know, actually, to have like as much hitbox info in the hitbox itself. I'm doing the transform work here in BP Mani, but that kind of makes sense because it's got to have a transform anyway when I spawn it. So why not, you know, construct it here and now. But anyway, so what I found is if I fed 0 into the timer, that just broke it. Like it just never spawned. So I guess that's just something into the time right here. That just doesn't work to my knowledge. So that's why there's a conditional here. And if it doesn't happen, then we just call spawn hitbox directly. We don't use the set timer by function to call it. So we call it no matter what. But yeah, that's how the 0 delay case is handled. And then for inactive, we destroy the hitbox. So hitbox has like kind of like 3 states you can think of it as. It's like it's technically there, but it's inactive, or like it is not yet active, I guess. For some, like just to keep it clear, there's not yet active. Then we set this timer, and the activation occurs. And at the same time, we actually do another timer, and that's when we destroy it. That's when it becomes inactive. Or so maybe now that I'm talking about it, maybe I should call this like destroy frame or something. I feel like inactive frame makes more sense when I think about it from the like player perspective, but on the code side, inactive is a little bit strange because it's inactive before it's active. So maybe, I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's how it goes. Currently, let's see. Let me look at my notes. Working towards an approach. Oh yeah, okay. I started to talk about this and I got super sidetracked. But I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was how I was drawing the hitbox. I mentioned it already. It was a debug box. I've migrated over to a mesh approach, and I didn't really speak to like why or how, but I mean I guess I kind of talked about how I showed the cube, but really there's just a very simple hitbox material instance. Actually, I guess I should just show the master material. Super simple right now. But basically what I wanted to do is I needed to have control over the opacity. Excuse me. Reason being was before the debug box was actually being drawn like on the event tick, right? So it was always being drawn I believe so. I don't believe this. I had this conditional stuff working, or in it yet. But by kind of but by handing off the timing work, so like the active frame into the hitbox, the trick I ran up against was the fact that so I guess I'm getting like on another tangent again. The reason I needed to include all this stuff about is visible is active is because I was thinking a little bit maybe more forward than I should, but now that the hitbox is basically being spawned frame 1 every time, but it's just a matter of whether or not it's active or not, I need to do some sort of check to say like, hey, don't draw the hitbox right away, and it shouldn't, and similarly, don't just draw it but don't make it do anything. Obviously it doesn't do anything period right now because that hasn't been implemented, but I needed a way to track whether or not a hitbox was in an active state so that it could collide with hurtboxes. So one thing I needed to do here was basically just have this check for is visible and is active. The distinction here is that is visible is something I will probably have as a toggle in the actual game, not like literally at any time you can toggle it, but in a training mode, for instance, you would want to be able to turn these off and on. So that's what I was saying or getting at when I said I was thinking maybe a little too far ahead. So that's being handled now with just an opacity like update. If those values are both true, then draw it with a 0.4 opacity so you see it but translucently. The benefit, finally, trying to get to that point this whole time, the benefit to having it as a mesh I think is twofold. The short-term thing is that right now I'm kind of just doing these hitboxes and these hurtboxes like very manually. So like when we go back to that table, you can see these values and they kind of map pretty decently, I'd say, to the model. But this is me just like punching in a number, hitting play, hit the input, you know. I'm like punching in the number, hitting input, hit play, etc. There was no like, I was just kind of like I was relying on the game in runtime to kind of show me where that debug box landed, and I was kind of eyeballing it and be like, yeah, that looks pretty good, that's about right. The reason that's not like a great approach, in my opinion, is that as animations get more complicated, you're going to have more like motion on the character. Right now I'm doing a very basic jab where like they barely move, they lean forward a little bit and like a quick little thrust, like just a it's like the most minor animation, right? You can imagine a character wants to do like a bicycle kick or a big like jump overhead kick, slam, whatever, a grab. It's like as the animation gets more complicated, you're going to need to represent that with more complicated like shifting of hurtboxes, and doing that purely by hand is kind of, when you're purely, and by hand I mean like just touching numbers and kind of being like that feels like it shrunk to 35 or 50 by 50 or whatever, like whatever shape or length you think a hitbox is moving. That's not a great approach. By making it a visible, tangible object instead of a debug box, which as far as I know only works in like the runtime of like a non-product version of your build or non-product build of your game. Now I can, in theory, like open a animation. I wish I had another animation to demo this with, or like this concept, but I believe I could. I've opened up a level sequence. If I hit play, I don't know which menu it is. This one? Okay. So I should, in theory, now. I haven't actually done this, but I think this process will be smoother. Blueprints, hitbox. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm already seeing that I don't have it actually set up entirely. So currently the way the hitbox is actually being drawn is you can see it in the begin play. I'm taking its material and I'm creating it into a dynamic material instance, so I can then modify it at runtime. I think I'll need to go into the construction script. I was just talking about how I don't think this fits my use case, but I think it will be for this. My thought is, by making it into an object here, if I had the setup right, I could turn up the opacity, set the color if I want to, it doesn't really matter. And I can run the animation, and I can I don't know why I'm using play. I can literally scroll, or it could be like here, 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 here. I can, in theory, like adjust it as need be, and I can make this hitbox like I can like the scale's not gonna matter because I don't think the mesh is visible right now. Actually, are you visible? No, but I mean I've got an outline, so it kind of represents the right thing. Although it's because the level sequence is perpendicular to the actual game world, it's a little funky. So I guess I wouldn't do it. And I mean, the actual value would be in the X, but it looks like I'll be working out of like the Y. Let's say 30, and we'll say you're like 20. So like you can see now I've kind of got something that I can actually interact with. I've got something that I can interact with that is like the actual hitbox in the game world as I'm running. I can like toying with the animation. So like I could be like here. Wait, no. Here is like the peak of the punch, right? So I want it should be like this. And actually, I think I overshot the Z. It should be like 16. There we go. That's perfect. And so now I'm like, now I can like just like punch to the frames. I can go, I can, okay, at this point, I don't think the punch should be active anymore. Whatever. I already had an inactive frame, but let's pretend I didn't animate this already. So I would then, where'd that box go? Box. Now I can, I can still probably keep this hitbox because I want the ham to be active, right? Or like tangible, right? You should be able to whiff punish the jab. So now this will turn into like a hurt box, and I can still use these numbers, Basically, by making it into an object rather than a debug box that only exists in runtime, I have an easier tool for setting up these hitboxes on the animation. I can actually like visibly adjust it and affect it in real time, and I'm not just punching numbers into a table and then hoping it looks right eventually. The second thing, and this is more overly forward thinking, by making it into a mesh that can exist in the runtime, because a debug bot, or sorry, it can exist in the what is it called? The released version of the game. I can now use it for the like hypothetical training mode stuff that I was talking about before. Debug box, to my knowledge, cannot exist in a final build version. There seems to be some element of like you port a beta build or whatever into a final product. Debug boxes, to my knowledge, do not like carry forward. In that case, they are purely for debugging. So by making it into this, I've sort of made the Carson of like 6 months from now life easier because I can just use this in the training mode. 6 months seems pretty optimistic actually, but you know what I mean. So that is why I went with the mesh approach. Yeah, I think that about covers it. Let me do one more skim of my notes. Capsulated. Yeah, that more or less addresses the changes. When I talked about the straight priority, I kind of glossed over some of the... I didn't really gloss over, I just didn't talk about it. The approaches that I considered. I wanted early on to actually use the animation blueprint to inform the... I wanted to inform like the state machine stuff, so like, because it feels like it's just so appropriate, right? If you were... I picked a weird YouTube playlist for this. Drop the... cast. that's right. I have to. Okay. This feels like such a natural place to me for like where I would set up the logic to dictate like if I'm in a combo, right? There's certain combo routes where you can cancel. Maybe you have a move where you can if you like hit the enemy or they block it even, you can then cancel some of the recovery with a jump. That's a thing you might see in a fighting game. It felt like an appropriate place to do it here, but what I found the more I dug into is that like you don't really have the animation blueprint tell like the blueprint actor info. It's sort of a mostly one-way approach to our flow. So I've resigned myself to try and have the blueprint BP Manny sort of dictate like things like how moves flow into each other for now. I'm guessing I will take the form of another struct or a table even, where like I'll have something like it'll look maybe like a join table where something like a join table where I'll be stating like what moves can go into what other moves. And if that relationship exists, then like when you're trying to do like enhanced like these inputs, the state priority will like kind of leave you a hole to like go into those animations, those montages. I'm obviously like still thinking about it here, and this is me just talking aloud for now, but yeah. I think I said it last week, but this week I would really like to get to the state where the animation or the hitboxes are now like interacting or intersecting with one another, and there's some sort of response, even if it's just like a debug message is getting printed. That'd be a great step forward. I would like to do like a new animation or two, just something to kind of test that workflow. I was hypothesizing a minute ago about using the mesh and the level sequence to kind of like map out where hitboxes will live. And yeah, I'll see what else from there. I'm also like as I talk in these videos, I'm realizing like I've had like a lot of scattered thoughts as to like what I think I should work on next. I'll probably do something like make a chart, just to like encapsulate ideas, things that I could work on now. Like, you know, another thing that I always think about whenever I'm doing any like demo is like updating how the camera works, and I'd like to get like a second player operational. Right now, the other guy over there is just not even functional. He's just there to like kind of pretend to be a fighting game, and you can see I even slide into the background when I touch him. So, you know, local multiplayer for now. Camera control boundaries for the screen, right? Because I shouldn't be able to just like slide off the screen. It should be like me in correlation to the other player are kind of controlling where the camera is, which controls where we can stand. Those are the things I'd like to work on next. There's obviously UI for like the health and meters or anything like that. I could even do UX stuff, like not have the game boot up straight into a level. But that seems like it'd be cumbersome for like the sake of testing, so I'll probably do that later. You know, there's a billion ideas. I'll probably try and get those into like some sort of chart, and maybe I'll show that in the next video. But yeah. Thank you for watching, if you're watching, take care.